Welcome to the Kyle Experience. This is episode 7. On this show, what we like to do is kind of take seemingly difficult issues and present them in ways that are easily understandable for the average person. Today, I have Riley with me. Anything you'd like to say to the crowd, Riley?
Just thanks for tuning in. I love doing these with you, Kyle, and I'm excited to get into it.
Absolutely. Well, with that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. So today we will be speaking on perspectivism. So, go move this out the way. Whoops, went a little far. I have to work on slide transition here for the next one. But um, so what is perspectivism? It is a theory of knowledge presented by Friedrich Nietzsche. It's best represented by the different appearances that something can have based on where you're at with it, which is greatly demonstrated by this picture here. To this guy here on the right, it seems as if the water is not very deep, but to the person who isn't as large as him, it seems that it's very deep. And that's kind of what Nietzsche's trying to get at here. So he believes that there's infinite views for any one thing, and that truths are subject to bias, which is, I believe, 100% true. What do you think of that, Riley? Do you think that truths are subject to bias, or that there's a ultimate kind of objective truth that someone can reach?
Um, well, I think there are an infinite amount of ways to view something for sure. Like, for example, I'm drinking a Coke right now, right? My perspective is that a Coke every now and then is probably not bad for you. But a health guru would be like, do not drink pop, don't drink soda, bad for you, soda, whatever.
Yeah,
Um, same with a Zen, right? Like it's the same concept. You can either see it as a negative or you can see it as a positive. You can also see yourself as you can also have that same image within yourself, right? So it's like how you see yourself isn't how other people are going to see you, and vice versa. You know what I'm saying?
absolutely.
Yeah. So I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. I do as well. Especially how he was saying for this third point that no two perspectives are alike. I was doing a thought experiment earlier, and I was just trying to think of ways I could explain this better. And if you were to have like two twins, like born from the same time, same exact chromosomes, everything's the same from them, they would still have different perspectives just because they're like, let's say they're in a classroom, they're a little more to the left or a little more to the right. So they'll be more focused on the one instead of the two, or, it doesn't matter. But like, regardless, like your perspective will never be the same unless somebody is literally in your shoes.
Yeah, unless those twins go through the same exact thing. Like one of those twins could have been subject to a trauma when they were kids. So they see this person as triggering and whatever, whereas this person just sees it as a regular person,
Yeah,
like just a
absolutely.
normal action.
Yeah, and even if they were to go through the exact same things, like simple like nuances, like having to wait for the bathroom would make their perspective, like their perception different, just because like, oh, we got to go first, so now I'm used to waiting, or now I had to wait and I'm not used to that, so that's more, so it all, I really do buy into this perspectivism point of view of truths are subject to bias, because even with things like scientific like theories, I'll see it differently than you would see it too. And then the answers you come up with will be different from the ones I come up with, simply because we are seeing it from different perspectives.
Mm. Yeah, and I think a combination of all perspective is where truth lies.
Yeah.
If that
And
makes sense.
yeah, I agree with that. Our friend Nietzsche would probably disagree with that, just because he doesn't believe that there is a possible objective truth, like period. Like it's impossible.
Yeah. It's like, well, like I broaden my perspective. So it's like, all right, all of our perspectives on this one thing is the truth. All of them are true. So that is the truth.
Yeah. And that
Like
is
and
a
it and it's a long list, but it's the truth.
and that's actually part of something we'll be talking about here today. The view of transcendental perspectivism. So I think this is a great time to kind of move on. Nietzsche also had some quotes in The Will to Power that I felt were interesting enough to bring up. So he says that everything is subjective. Oh, everything is subjective, you say, but even this is interpretation. The subject is not something given, it is something added and invented and projected behind what there is. Finally, it is necessary to posit an interpreter behind the interpretation. Even this invention is hypothesis. So I'll just continue. Insofar as the word knowledge has any meaning, the world is knowledgeable, but it is interpretable otherwise. It has no meaning behind it, but countless meanings. A perspectivism is our need to interpret the world, our drives, and their for and against. Every drive is a kind of lust to rule. Each one has its perspective that it would like to compel all other drives to accept as a norm. So what he's saying here, and the thing I kind of focus on the most here is in that second point, where he says, the world is interpretable even without having knowledge. It has no meaning behind it, but countless meanings. And I think that could be a really great example for me, for example, my son. So like I see a bunch of things as this is what it should be, but he sees them as toys. Like anything's a toy to him. So like um just based on your perspective of like having that experience with it, or like having the knowledge that this is what it's supposed to be like, will definitely make a big difference in like your perspective. And so like for example, he can't, when he sees a doorknob, he considers that like a toy, but I
Yeah.
see it as a way to open a door, and he doesn't see it like that yet, so he's trapped. So that's something kind of where, at least if there is an objective truth, that's where it's interesting, where I have an interesting dynamic where I can show him that, or I can decide not to based on how I feel, which
Right.
I think the transcendental perspective isn't necessarily that. The transcendental perspective would say, I see it as a doorknob, he sees it as a toy, and we're both correct.
Yeah.
Where if it was an objective truth, one of us would be wrong, which is not necessarily transcending either one of ours truths.
Right. Because why can't the doorknob be a toy? Why can't it be?
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know?
Only because
So it's
someone
like,
made that decision.
and yeah, and no, it's just interesting. It is interesting. It's like the more knowledge you gain, the almost more narrow-minded you can become if you're not careful.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Because when's the last time you saw the doorknob as a toy?
Never.
Yeah, exactly.
Have grown up.
Yeah. So it's like,
Hmm.
you know, it's like as the more knowledge you gain, the less you see it at, like the less options you begin to see, or if you're not conscientious of it.
Yeah, and it also could be seen the other way too, where it's like the more knowledge you gain, the more ways you could look at it possibly. Like I could see it as a doorknob, but it could also be like a weapon, like if you're John Wick, or something to heal people if you're like a great healer and you can like make shift shit. Um, but it's just interesting because it seems like that'd be a regression, but really is it if it's broadening your ability to kind of look at the world?
Well, yeah. Well, I think it has two opportunities, right? So it's like two pathways in the brain where it's like, okay, that's not a toy, or it's like, all right, that is also a toy now. That is both to open the door, and it is now a toy. And
And
like,
that's
and you can pass
something
that knowledge on too if you really wanted to.
I say that is definitely something I've been dealing with. We're like, all right, this is the remote, but if it's in my son's hands, it's not a remote, it is a toy. And so you got to think of it like that too, where it's like you might want to use the remote to like change the station or something, but he would see it as like you taking a toy from him, which
Right.
is something you should kind of be aware of, at least for me, because I don't really want to deal with temper tantrums. So at least at my point, I try not to give him the remote, period. But
Yeah.
that's kind of what he's saying with like the objective truth, where um he could learn that it controls things if I let him play with it long enough, but because I don't really wish to do that, then he doesn't get the opportunity to make that decision, or make that progress, I would say. So that's why I think that he has a point with this perspectivism, because I don't think it's right that I have the ability to kind of withhold, well, I guess you could say that it is something that does happen, where people withhold certain information in order to take benefit from it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's necessarily right.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's like how people profit off knowledge that they have, but they're not willing to teach.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Like Gum Road, where they like have a bunch of
Courses.
yeah, and it's like you could literally just tell that to someone in a conversation, but someone wants to profit off of it, so that's what has to happen in order for it to be
Exactly.
shared.
Exactly.
But moving on. So there's different types of perspectivism as well. So there is individualists and collectivists, and then there's transcendental, like we were speaking about a little earlier. I think we start with individualist. So for the individualists, it is true for me. Perspectives are the points of view of a particular individual, and a perception is only true if the individual believes it's true. So I could be locked in jail, but if I believe it's like a castle and like it's great, then that's what's going to be true for me, regardless of how it actually turns out to be in reality. That's whatever I believe is what's going to be true. A lot of
Yeah, no,
people. Oh, sorry, what were you gonna say?
well, I was just saying, like, it definitely is like perception is like people can go to jail and get a lot better, and or you can go the other way and you can just really dive into that lifestyle. You know what I'm saying? And like, all right, I'm a criminal, and now I'm gonna act criminal my whole life. Like, if you don't like it, there's two form, and I've never been to jail, but I've heard stories where people get better or people start the path of I am now just a criminal
Yeah,
rather than rehabilitate and get better and grow, read books. You know what I'm saying? I think there's two avenues on that. And whichever one you see it as, that's how you're going to manifest that time spent,
no, absolutely. And
you
I
know?
think this kind of goes into the collectivist a little bit, but also how you're treated or how who are part of your group or you interact with on a daily, however they treat you also kind of informs who you are as well, at least from a collectivist point of view. The individualist doesn't care about what anyone else thinks. But yeah, I feel like sometimes I'll go with an individualist point of view for like certain things. Like if somebody says something like, "Oh, you suck at basketball," like, no, I don't. I don't believe that. That's not true for me, so it's not true.
Yeah.
But from a collectivist point of view, if you have enough people tell you that, like, then you have to believe it. But you don't have to be that way, which is extremely nice. For places like Eastern Asia, they are very collectivist. So like if they decide you're weird, then you're weird. Like there's nothing you can really do, no matter how good or nice you are, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is to an extent. Um, I think that people who do live individualist lifestyles, when they have to work collectively, they clash a lot because they might not want to fit into the specific role that they have to take on to be part of the team, you know.
Mhm.
um a good example of that would be kind of what we went through this weekend with people leaving the game a little early. They didn't want to take on the role of potentially losing or the role of third place or whatever it might be, so they went individualist and said, I don't need this, I'm done, like this doesn't apply to me, which can go either way depending on how you want to look at it. But I definitely think there's something about kind of accepting your role and excelling in it regardless of how you might feel about it, that is very useful, I'd say, for like humans in general.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a way to benefit from both, right? So if you can, it's like balance, right? So you have to be able to audit which ones are going to help you and which ones are going to harm you in every scenario, right? So it's like, all right, this guy says I suck at basketball, but I'm pretty nice, and if I let my confidence drop to his where he wants my confidence at, I'm gonna be worse. I'm gonna
Yeah,
be a shittier basketball player. Whereas, so like you don't adopt that, right? But then in the same format, it's like, all right, I've had 25 people tell me I need to be better at basketball. Maybe I should get better,
yeah,
you know? And I think I think an unwillingness to um
take
consider both an unwillingness to consider both is where your ego and your pride steps in, right? It's like, all right, fuck that. I'm not playing for third. I'm just gonna head out. You know, I don't care what anybody else thinks, whatever, you know.
yeah,
I don't care that there's people that paid to play that aren't getting another game because I just don't want to play. That's that's ego, that's pride type shit, and yeah, I think the ability to look at both, and just kind of interpret both and dive into both and be willing to consider both is a good practice. Like, look at it from both ends,
Yeah.
and just see.
And I think you have a really good point there with like being able to consider both, because sometimes like you fit into different roles all the time, just based on where you're at. And that's kind of where he's getting at with this perspectivism. Like, you can go to like a shitty team and be the best player. You can go to a smaller team and have to be a role player. And depending on what you like want to do, or not even what you want to do, where your role is, and I would say like the hierarchy kind of, or I guess this would be a great time for me to move on to a collectivist, because it does get into like different ways that you can be looked at collectively. So the first one is consensus, or at least the first way to look at collectivist perspectivism is consensus. And here you kind of get like a group agreement. So like what it would be here is like, oh, like for example, I'm sorry. For kids, like they decide one kid's weird and that kid's weird for the rest of his life, pretty much, That's the consensus of the group. If people were to move somewhere else, they could have a different consensus, but because those people are all together in that area and they've made that decision, that's what they are. In the terms of power, it's whoever has the most authority. A good example of this would be like Twitter is supposed to be free speech, but Elon Musk kicked Kanye off. And I'm not saying he was wrong for doing that, but that's not free speech. And he only did it because he had the ability to do that. He had the privilege and power to do that. So whoever has the privilege and power in a collectivist power structure pretty much makes the rules. I'd say that happens to us a good amount, like in our everyday lives, where at least in the media, where you get shown a certain image when really the image could be completely different. For Marxists, it's a little more complicated. It is more about like fighting the power, pretty much. So like a proposition is only true if it like helps like move forward a certain political stance. So the example that they had was the proletariat, which like the workers fight or whatever. Um and the only things that were true for him were things that like made their argument stronger for why they should have more like freedom, pretty much. And that's a way to look at it. That's a way that some people look at it like politically too, where oh, this argument's only true if like Democrats are lying, or like something like that. You know what I mean? Or Republicans are saying this, so it's obviously not true because Democrats say this. Or so it's all based on the Marxist is more political, I would say. And then so consensus is like group, power is someone with authority, and then Marxist is political groups.
Yeah, borderline like motive.
Yeah.
Like I feel like a lot of political things get like they won't tell you their true motive,
Yeah, it's always
or
and
or it gets lost in translation, and it just becomes this really radical movement.
yeah, I would say
And
that.
yeah, so that's what I would say about the Marxists in terms of political. And then in power, it's like definitely just like motive. But then I feel like consensus is like not motive. It's just like more of general observation.
Yeah. Like that's more like I see it, you see it, we all kind of have this see like we all see it, and this is what we've all agreed on. Versus power would be like, all right, Elon Musk said this is bad, so this is what's going to be bad from now on. And the Marxist would be like, oh, the political organization I'm affiliated with said that we should do this, so now this is what we do because that's what they decided. So moving on to transcendental. So let's make this smaller. So for transcendental, the information has to include the other person. So like if you say that oh X is A and they say X is B and you say no X is A, like and you think that that's transcendental perspectivism, that's not the case. Transcendental perspectivism has to consider the other person's point of view and take it completely. Like you can't say
Yeah.
like oh this isn't what happened. Like no, this is what they're saying happened, so that's what you have to believe. I know that's something we deal with a lot in psychology, where it's like, oh, like you're saying this is what you're seeing. Well, we got to believe you because we can't tell you that you're wrong. So the picture here is supposed to kind of illustrate that a little bit. So the person on the left sees it as an A, and the person on the right sees X as a B. And those are both options for X on here. X could be like how the dots are, that could be any letter in the alphabet, pretty much.
Mhm.
And other people would have different views as well, based on like if they were to come from A and he says, hey, this looks like A, what do you think? And they might say, oh, this looks like A squared or something. It could be something as simple as that. But there's a million different ways to look at it, like Nietzsche was saying at the beginning. And then in order for it to be transcendental, it has to incorporate everybody's point of view.
Yeah. No, and that's what I was talking about earlier, is like the list will go on and on and on about what something is. And that's the transcendental perspective of it, is like all things are true. That's the true definition, is all things about it. All perspectives about it are true.
Yes.
So that's the complete definition.
And we'll come back to this picture here. Nietzsche had some thoughts on this as well. He argues that no purely objective science can exist. Uh, any single perception is limited not only by the physics of its existence, but also by its assumptions and beliefs. So, like I was saying for the doorknob example, I could see it as a doorknob, but that's only because I assume it to be one and I believe it to be one. If I assume it to be like something to eat, it could be that, just based on what I want to believe it to be. And that's not just because of its physics. That's because I could, like, I'm a human. I can, if I wanted to, I could ingest metal. Like I've seen it.
Yeah.
And then the conclusion of this philosophy, or a conclusion, would be that no absolute or transcendental truth can exist. Now this is where it kind of gets interesting for me for Nietzsche, just because I feel like it's kind of paradoxical for him to say that, where it's like, oh, his view is always right, but everyone else's view is wrong. And he does mention that that is a paradox that he deals with this. So he considers all of his kind of claims to be just assumptions, or that's how he gets around that issue. But um, yeah, what do you think of that? Do you think that he makes a point there that it's not only limited by its physics, but also by our assumptions and beliefs?
Well, I'm looking at um the first point, and it basically says no purely objective science can exist. And so like in the doorknob example, why am I choosing to see the doorknob as a function of the door? So I know how to work the door.
Yeah,
So there's a motive. So it's not objective, right? It'd be subjective because I have motive behind it,
yeah.
behind why I want that being my understanding. So that's a valid point.
Yeah, because I think what he's really trying to say is like there's no way to get around it really. Like we all have our motives, like, and we can't really do anything about it. Because that's just kind of part of life. Is that you're in a certain point of view. Like you have this point of view and you can't get out of it. Even
Yeah.
if you were to read like even if me and you were to read the same thing at the same time from the same teacher, like we would all have different me and you would have different viewpoints just because we grew up differently or anything, even if we grew up the same.
Yeah, like my mindset while reading it would be different than yours. Like, what if I'm going through something, or what if you're going through something and I'm not? And like, you're trying to understand something to help you, and I'm trying to understand it to pass the fucking class, you know? Like,
Yeah.
that alone proves that the first point, it kind of can be true, you know? Because
That
we all are from a different perception, you know?
yeah.
All right, so then the second point, any single perception is limited not only by the physics of its existence, but also its assumptions and beliefs. Which kind of goes into what I said about the doorknob. It's like it's assumed that the doorknob is used to open the door.
Yeah.
I want to open the door. So then therefore it goes back to the first one. It's not objective.
Yeah. And there's actually a lot more well, some more stuff for this. We went through that, went through that, went through that. So in the traditional sense of objective reality, a transcendental truth known by one perceiver would be equally valid for the other because it transcends each of their unique perceptions. But this is in an equal relationship because the transcendental truth is right and ours would be wrong. Uh, I think that's worth noting here, just because if we were to agree with him, would that be an objective truth or would that be our own personal truths? I feel like it would have to be our own personal if we're following what he's saying. So therefore, like if we were to have a transcendental truth, it would have to be not only his perspective, not only our perspective, but everyone who possibly can be. And that's kind of what I was trying to go with this whole video series and everything, is just try to get everybody's opinion on all these things, because it's kind of a lot of information to just take in and say, okay, this is what it is. Because sometimes, and like we've seen before, like science changes over time. Like the way we dealt with like mental health, for example, has changed drastically over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And I just like to see what everyone else thinks, just because, it's real easy for me to sit here and say these guys are right, but are they?
Yeah, it's tough because, like I said, I can't argue the fact that nothing is purely objective. But I think the collective, but is the collective perception to survive?
That's what I believe it is.
Like, is the collective motive to survive? If that's the case, then it's not subjective, or then it's not objective.
Nope, it's all subjective.
Yeah, so it's hard to disagree with what he's saying here.
Right. And then it's like, well, and one issue I ran into with this was like, well, then there's no point in me doing anything. Like, because what am I going to achieve if all the knowledge I have is not actually based in the world? It's all based off what I think. Which, I mean, that's what everyone did anyway when they were writing books, was saying like, this is what I think. So I don't know. It's just interesting to me because I don't know necessarily how to, where acquiring knowledge would fit into this, because like even if I were to learn something that I thought would be good for everybody, I only think that because that's what I think. It's not because that's what everyone else is like pretty much telling me.
Right.
So I don't know. It kind of makes it seem like it's impossible to really, I guess, make a difference. I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely like I'm having that process in my mind too, where it's like, all right, if like, yeah, everybody's beliefs and whatever perceptions are true, but if they're all subjective, why the hell should I care about anything?
Right.
Like, why would I make music to help people? Why would I make philosophy podcasts and slideshows about this stuff? Like, why? Now then, like you said, the question comes up: why do anything? Why does anything matter?
Yeah. And he doesn't necessarily give an answer to that. That's an issue with Nietzsche, is that he leaves a lot of answers for the future, which he's my favorite philosopher. So I always try to at least attempt to answer some questions.
Yeah.
But like I said, and I put this in my paper, there's no like real answers in life, just preference. And you can prefer to look at it from an individualist perspective. You can prefer to look at it from a collectivist power perspective or a collectivist consensus perspective. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be your point of view. And no matter what you do, you can't escape that. And I guess that's something we all just kind of got to make our peace with a little bit.
Well, yeah, and I think with that comes comes an inner power. So like, okay, nobody's opinion even matters. Why not just put mine out into the world anyway? Because even their opinion of me, or even their perception of me, is going to be different from the next person. So like, it's almost empowering a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like freeing almost.
100%. I mean, I guess I haven't really necessarily looked at it from that point of view, but I can definitely see where it's like, even if they do have an issue with what I'm saying, they're biased just like I am. And
Yes.
that means that they can be wrong too, just like I can be. So that doesn't mean that just because one critic said one thing that has to be the truth. Um, which is actually, like you said, empowering because
Yeah, literally.
I can get rejected to one place but get accepted in another place if I just don't give up.
Right. And so like you look at people like Andrew Tate, or I don't know if you've seen Sneeko. Sneeko's kind of like Tate in that way. And then like Jordan Peterson, or the flip side. I mean, I don't pay attention to many of the flip sides, but you know, what do I have to critique about them? Why not just put my perspective out there anyways?
Yeah.
Like rather than critique them, just put my perspective out there unapologetically.
And I feel like removing critique in a way that is negative. So making it so that it's just like, all right, here's what you think, here's what I think, instead of here's what you think you're wrong, here's what I think. And that's what they're kind of advocating for with the transcendental side. I think that is a more you'll get a fuller picture of what's actually going on. Even if some of the things you receive are incorrect, quote unquote, you would still be able to see, well, okay, that's might be wrong, but people might see it that way. So maybe I should take into account that that's a possibility that that's what people will see. And I feel like that's like people try to control the way they're perceived so much because, like you said, everyone has a perception of everything, and you want to make it. You always want to start with the best foot out forward, and you don't want to start out behind the eight ball. But sometimes it's impossible not to, and that doesn't mean that you're wrong because you were started out behind the eight ball.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I know even as like an artist, or like I've thought about just putting out like little video vlogs of just like a video diary of like
Yeah,
the things I'm thinking, or like streaming that, like live streaming. Then it always comes back to like, oh well, what if I have these bad like critics, or what
people
if people
hate
think I'm
it.
a dork, or like, you know what I'm saying, like all sorts of things. But like at the end of the day, we die,
Yeah,
and what does
yeah,
it
what?
matter, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I can definitely see that.
Like momentum mori, dude. Like you die. Remember your death. Remember that you die in order to live. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, that's honestly all I have for today. I've been trying to keep it shorter, and this was actually a really good way to do that. See if I can. That's not what I want. All right. But yeah. Do you have any kind of final words or any final thoughts on this video, Riley?
No, man. Just like I said, if you're watching this and you're looking, you're seeing it, and you're not fully understanding, just take this, right? Everybody else's perceptions are different in every manner. Some people are gonna welcome you. Some people are gonna be like, that guy is not my guy, or that girl is not my girl. Like I'm not fucking with that. Get that out of my life, you know. Um, but that's almost a little freeing because you never know. You never know who is or isn't gonna click with you and attach to your vibe, you know. So I say just unapologetically put yourself out there, and you know everything's true, right? Your perception of yourself is true. Same way as somebody else's perception of yourself is true, you know. And then build the skill, like practice the skill of determining which individual or the group one, which one you're going to identify with, or you know, work on auditing through those, you know, be better at that,
Yeah. No,
you know.
absolutely. And I have nothing to add to that because that was actually a really great, like, concise way to put it, Riley. So, so for anyone at home who's still watching, I really want to appreciate you and thank you. And you probably like this kind of content, so please go ahead and like and subscribe.